Hello listeners, it's Mark here again with another off-season SLP short, one that probably ran on a little bit long, but I had a great time chatting to, would you believe it, St Helens fans for this episode. We've got David Powell, regular contributor to the game reviews, on to talk about 2018, and then we've got Matt to his friends, Frogmore to his bestest friends, that's his internet friends, to talk a little bit about some of the new signings, and then both Matt and David give us their predictions for 2019. So without further ado, let's hear from the guys. So to talk about 2018, a very exciting 2018 for St Helens, I'm delighted to be joined by Dave Powell, or St David as most people will know him off of the Twitter. So how are you, David? Welcome to SLP.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much for having me. And I'm fine, Mark. Yeah, looking forward to the Christmas period as always. Although it's never quite the same now with not having a proper Boxing Day game against your lot. But never mind, things move on.
I mean, at least your Christmas can't be ruined by getting beaten by Wigan.
As so often it was.
Okay, so before we get into your views of the season, I'm just going to recap what I thought might happen, then what actually did happen. So I predicted, I wasn't far off with Saints. I predicted that Saints would finish first in the regular season, but then lose the grand final. And I also predicted you get to the semi-finals in the cup. And what came to pass is you finished top of the table, and very strongly so, but lost in both semi-finals, the semi-final in the playoffs and the semi-final in the Challenge Cup. So I'm starting to feel, doing these recap shows, that I did quite a good job with my predictions for both.
Yeah, you didn't do badly at all, did you? I'm not sure I did quite as well, and I never really do, to be honest, Mark. I always end up with my predictions going completely astray, which is why I never visit the bookmakers.
Well, before we talk about maybe where things didn't go astray for Saints this year and where they did, we've got a couple of other people who got in touch. I don't know if these are people that you know off of social media or fan boards or anything like that, but we had Kev HMHB who said, "We finished first, and despite winning nothing else, it's been an enjoyable 2018, especially after the dirge under Cunningham." And then Andrew Bryers said, "Huge improvement, but still work in progress." So thanks to those guys.
Yeah, and I think I share very much their viewpoints that it was a great improvement for us over what we'd seen over the past sort of 2 years under Kieran Cunningham. But it was definitely a work in progress, or at least we hope it's progress. We'll see, won't we?
I think that, in a way, the best way to sum that up is the first sort of bullet point I noted down on Saints' season is that there was only 2 losses in the regular season, which was amazing. 2 losses then in the Super 8s, but also 2 losses in the semi-finals, which
that's a good way to put it.
Isn't the way round you necessarily want it, I suppose, really. But you've got to win all those games to get to the semi-finals. But rather than focus on those lowlights of those semi-finals, and it would be very easy for me as a Wigan Warriors fan to do that with you, Dave. I think we should celebrate actually a very entertaining and ultimately a trophy winning season for St Helens, even if Saints didn't celebrate that trophy too hard. You were the highest scorers. You scored 20 more tries over the Super League campaign than anyone else, and you were second best in defence, statistically speaking, as well. So, I mean, there was a great highlight moments, and that started with the hammering of Cass in round 1. You ended the Good Friday hoodoo. You scored 60 plus points at one point in the season in 2 games in a row, a home game and then away game. And so just talk to me about all these great highlights and what was so great watching this year.
Well, it was a very exciting season to be a Saints fan. I think we were approaching the season optimistic with what we'd seen from Holbrook at the end of last year, and a bit more of a return to trying to play rugby, what I would call proper rugby, with the ball being moved a little bit wider of the ruck. So we're fairly optimistic. Obviously, we didn't make the final. We were beaten by Castleford in a very close semi, but it left us wanting more this year. And we certainly flew out of the blocks last season, and got off to a great start against Castleford, who were admittedly pretty below par that day. But we had a very good run in the first sort of 4 or 5 games, really culminating in the game at Warrington, which was sort of provided for me anyway the first real highlight of the season, because we always love playing Warrington at Warrington, and there's nothing quite like standing on that terracing at Warrington and watching the Saints beat them again. So not only was it the usual predictable victory away to our enemies Warrington, but in the game itself, probably my favourite try of the season, the one where Richardson ducked and got through the line, and then on the run chipped the ball through, and Percival scored out on the left, and that was a hugging strangers moment on the terraces. We thoroughly enjoyed that. Was one of my real highlights of the season. That was then followed by a bizarre game, our first loss of the season against Leeds, where I don't know, both teams sort of chucked the ball about, but defence was forgotten about, and it was a really odd sort of game. I'd almost, when I was looking back through the season to remind myself ahead of this call, I'd kind of wiped that game from my memory. It was a real odd one.
I think was it the one where Ash Hanley scored a couple of tries where the ball just kind of fell to him without anyone trying to pick it up?
Yes, it was a bizarre, horrible, scruffy sort of game, and we absolutely deservedly lost. But it was a very strange game. And then a couple of games later, we had the first game against you guys, and that provided us with our second highlight of the season, where Regan Grace scored that try right in the corner of the game to win the match in what was a very entertaining.
Oh, a brilliant game, yeah.
Yeah, on Good Friday, and both sides played really well that day. Widnes was nowhere near as interesting, mainly because Widnes weren't very good, and they absolutely lashed it down. How can you get so wet sitting in a stand? Anyway, we were supposedly undercover, and it was absolutely soaking that day. I was soaked to the skin. And then there was my first real low light of the season. Do you want me to save that till later, or can I chip it in now?
Yeah, go for it.
Wakefield away, which was... I love going to Wakefield away, not because of the ground, obviously, but I love going up there. There's a couple of really cracking pubs up in Wakefield, and the fans there are always really passionate about the game, and I
that's really, one way to describe it.
One way to describe it.
I describe it as passionate for shouting at the referee.
Well, it was my turn to shout at the referee, because it was Fatty Hewer was refereeing us that day, and it was the slowest, scruffiest, most horrible game of rugby that I saw all last year. And but credit to Wakefield, because they really adjusted to that style of refereeing. And I do remember coming away from that game being quite furious, but also being really impressed, particularly with Rhys Lynn, who I'd noticed before, but then I'd never really sort of seen him play as well as that in the flesh. And he was fantastic that day. He was really, really good. And I was delighted he got his international call-up later in the year, although he didn't play in the big games. He did get to play against France, and I thought he played very well.
Yeah, well, if that was a low light, you bounced back pretty well. You had 66 points against Huddersfield and 60 points against Salford in the next two games.
That was fairly emphatic the next couple of games, and blew the cobwebs away. And then probably the next highlight was obviously going back up to Castleford and beating them in the Challenge Cup, and that was I couldn't actually be there that day. I ended up having to watch it on the TV. In fact, I was in the middle of a long distance walk, but I'd taken the day off because it was from the walk, because it was my father's birthday, and coincidentally the game was on, so I managed to watch it on the TV. And Ben Barber had a blinder that day, as he had on a number of games in that first half of the season. But I think
particularly against Castleford,
he did
put Castleford to the sword every time he played against them.
He did seem to enjoy himself against Castleford. I don't think that was anything particularly against Fat Boy Rob or anything like that. I just think it was just a bit of a coincidence. But I think actually that game was a bit of a turning point for Barber in the season, because I think he picked up a knock in that game and he was never really quite the same man after that match. It's something to do with his ankle or his knee. But one of the things I loved about Barber early in the season was, and I hadn't really appreciated this watching him in Australia, was his ability to go sideways with as much force and speed as he could go forwards was what really, I think, made him stand out as a player. And after that game, I never really saw him go sideways the same way ever again. And I think whilst he still played pretty well for the rest of the season, it did limit his ability to break the line. Yeah. I think. I also think other sides had the opportunity to watch him play a lot more and took a lot more care with him in defence. But I don't think it was ever quite the same after that game. Then came sort of highlight number 3 in the season, which was, and he's responsible for 2 or 3 of my highlights of the season, which was the away game at Leeds.
Okay.
Having wiped out the first game from my memory completely until looking back, this one definitely stood out from the crowd, because it was a rip-roaring game up at Headingley, won eventually with a long drop goal from Richardson. A couple of minutes from the end of the game, and that was a super game to be at and really enjoy.
This was also the game that gave me one of the sort of most lasting memories of Saints that was not Ben Barber, and this was the game where the try was scored when Danny Richardson switched the play. I mean, I think Barber was possibly involved and Percival was definitely involved, but when Richardson switched the play on the last, and Leeds just didn't have an answer for it. They couldn't see what was coming, and I think it showed just some of the set plays that maybe Holbrook and maybe the players had put in for Saints this year were always with that attacking intent. There was always a desire to score points and not just sit back and sort of thing. So they were all really clever plays, but with the end goal of scoring tries, it was exciting.
It was, and for much of the season that was the case. It was, and we'll come to it, I've no doubt later when we do talk about the semi-finals. It was only a shame that, particularly in the Warrington game, we really went into our shell, I think. But let's come back to that later, because that was definitely a low light of the season. But most of the season, that attacking intent with the ball was something that was a hallmark of the way we played, and a real contrast to what we'd seen under the previous coach.
Yeah. The regular season ended then. You with obviously a win of 11 or 12. 11 wins in a row, I think it was in the end, but it kind of ended. There was the win at Wigan, which was another close-fought game between the two sides. Saints were definitely the better side, but Wigan kept it very close and kept the score down. And then the same thing happened in the reverse game against Warrington as well. The score was kept low. It was a penalty right on the hooter from his own half by Danny Richardson, wasn't it? That won the game ultimately.
And again, another highlight there, Mark. Totally,
and it showed the character of the kid, the cockiness and arrogance that he displays. He backed it up all in one go there with that, didn't he? Which was
he did
great for him.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he is only a kid, and he has provided some fabulous highlights. I think what he's not done for me yet, anyway, is show that he's capable of properly controlling a whole match and getting the players around the field in the way you'd want of a top scrum half. But he is only a lad, and he's clearly developing and showing a lot of promise.
I saw him do exactly that in the under-19s when he brought a Saints side to Wigan and won the under-19s a few years ago, and not many sides beat our under-19s, and he was definitely the standout man that day. But with those two closer margins of victory against two of the teams that were obviously then in the hunt for the silverware, and then you lost the first game of the Super 8s to a resurgent Huddersfield. Do you think there was any crack starting to show? Do you think you were getting Were you becoming concerned at that stage, particularly when Wigan put a big win on you in the Super 8s and